Why the United States Constitution is relevant today. What is a constitution? Merriam-Webster Online defines it as the basic principles and laws of a nation, state, or social group that determine the powers and duties of the government and guarantee certain rights to the people in it. Before the American War for Independence, colonists in America were proud to be British subjects because Great Britain was a legal society. They often quoted the English Constitution in defense of their rights. But the English Constitution wasn't a single document as we think of constitutions today. It was a collection of ideas from writings, including the English Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, and rulings and decisions made by the British courts. After the French Indian War, which was from 1754 to 1763, the British King and Parliament demanded that the American colonists pay what the British thought was their fair share for this expensive war. After all, it removed French influence and the threat of invasion from the frontier and secured all of the land east of the Mississippi, including Florida. The colonies, however, had charters, contracts, which granted their local governments the right to vote on taxes. So it was no surprise that they chose not to vote themselves tax increases. From 1763 to 1775, the King and Parliament began reinterpreting American rights by enacting a series of taxes, tariffs, and duties on them to force them to pay up, rights aside. We've all heard the expression, no taxation without representation, right? In order to bypass the American colonies' legislatures, the King and Parliament assigned the colonies what they called virtual representatives. These were hand-picked cronies living in England who had neither ever been to America nor had any intention of ever going, but they would vote in Parliament for the tax increases. And this is only one example of how England reinterpreted Americans' rights. The first thing the American colonists did was write the Declaration of Independence, which both announced their separation from Great Britain and the birth of the United States. It also famously declared the American understanding of what government is. The second thing they did was to write a constitution to get through the war. They learned the hard way that rights needed to be stated in a written constitution or they're meaningless. The first constitution was the Articles of Confederation, and by all accounts it was a dismal failure because it gave no real power to the federal government. After the war, Congress was assigned the task of fixing it, but it was so bad they locked the doors, drew the curtains, and just threw it away, instead adopting James Madison's Constitution as a starting point. Today, we often mistakenly think of our founding fathers as friends because they shared common views and a common enemy, but nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, there were many factions that were highly suspicious of each other, and some of the men at the Constitutional Convention would later try to kill each other in duels. This distrust, however, contributed greatly to their instituting checks and balances in the Constitution. They knew then that many people who seek power are exactly the kinds of people we don't want in power. To solidify it all, they made this new Constitution the supreme law of the land and required that government officials take an oath to support and defend it. So, you've got the Declaration of Independence, which lays out the basics of American political philosophy. That rights come from God, not from government. That government is the employee of the citizenry. That its one job is to protect people's inalienable rights, and if it fails to do this, the people have the right to change it in any way necessary, including by revolution. Then you have the new U.S. Constitution, which details how everything works, the three branches, elections, how to amend it, etc. But it's done in a very special way. Rather than writing down what rights citizens have, instead, it limits and balances federal power by enumerating only specific powers. Our founders made it clear over and over again that if a power wasn't in the Constitution, then it wasn't a federal power. But this promise of limiting the reach and scope of government wasn't enough for many Americans. They knew that government is a necessary evil that naturally grows and demanded further guarantees against their own new government doing to them what Great Britain had done, reinterpreting their rights away. So they agreed to sign it only if it included a Bill of Rights which definitively stated specific rights that the federal government could never interfere with. This group is known as the Anti-Federalists, and we have them to thank for our Bill of Rights. The other group, known as the Federalists, was led by Alexander Hamilton. They supported the new Constitution as it was, and argued that the addition of a Bill of Rights would actually be dangerous to rights. As Hamilton wrote in Federalist number 84, quote, "For why declare that things shall not be done which there is no power to do? Why, for instance, should it be said that the liberty of the press shall not be restrained when no power is given by which restrictions may be imposed?" Unquote. There's also a quote that's often erroneously attributed to George Washington, but it summarizes our founders' ideas really well. Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action. The U.S. Constitution is relevant today because, like the ring of stones around this campfire, it's the only thing keeping the fire of government from destroying everything as far as the eye can see. Most people around the world don't have the rights that we've enjoyed in our republic, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to keep and bear arms, etc. Unchecked government has been responsible for more deaths than anything else in human history, including hundreds of millions of souls through war and the murder of its own people. Our founders knew this. They lived it. They feared government, so they erected these stones to keep it in its place. Without this ring of stones limiting and restricting the fire, it will spread and destroy. Without our Constitution, government will do what it naturally does. Our Constitution, like the ring of stones, keeps all federal laws, departments, and officials subservient to it. Just as contracts between landlords and tenants or employers and employees are binding, the Constitution is the contract by the citizenry, which grants only specified powers to the federal government. The Bill of Rights limits it further by guaranteeing specific rights and reserving everything else, including other rights and powers not mentioned, to the citizenry or to the states. The U.S. Constitution is also relevant because all federal laws are subservient to it. As the supreme law of the land, rulings made by the United Nations or treaties by our own government that are contrary to it have no binding authority and are therefore meaningless. Finally, the U.S. government has in many ways become exactly what the U.S. Constitution was designed to protect us from. And the reason is that we've failed to allow the Constitution to do its job of limiting government, just like the ring of stones that contains the fire. Today, our government is full of judges and both elected and unelected bureaucrats who, despite having taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution, regularly subvert our rights through decree or interpretation, just as Great Britain did. But the U.S. Constitution also contains many powerful legal tools for the American citizenry to fix our current problems. These include the right to free speech, the right to protest, freedom of the press, the right to call grand juries, the power to remove government officials through impeachment, as well as the means to amend the Constitution itself. Americans just need to be reminded about these tools, that you have the power. I'm Matt Fitzgibbons from PatriotMusic.com. Thanks for watching.